In the 41st millennium, an ancient and immensely powerful race is beginning to awaken after more than 60 million years of sleep. The Necrons are returning, and when you look at what they possess, it's hard not to see them as one of the most dangerous powers in the galaxy. Technologically, the Imperium isn't even playing on the same level. Humanity fights with machines inherited from a better age. Some have been in service for thousands of years, maintained by people who no longer fully understand how they work. The Necrons, meanwhile, were already using self-repairing bodies, teleportation, weapons that strip matter apart, and technology capable of manipulating space itself long before humanity existed. The Aeldari also came from an incredibly advanced civilization, but what remains of them today is only a fraction of the empire they once had. The Necrons lost their empire too, but much of their strength didn't disappear with it. It went underground. Across the galaxy, tomb worlds still contain armies that have yet to wake. Chaos presents a completely different kind of threat, but even there the Necrons possess tools almost nobody else has. Blackstone and their pylon technology can suppress the influence of the warp, creating regions where the connection between real space and the Imperium becomes dangerously weak. Then there are the Tyranids. A hive fleet survives by devouring life and turning biomass into new organisms. Every inhabited world it consumes can help replace the creatures it lost getting there. But the Necrons aren't made of flesh. Destroy a Necron army and you don't give the hive fleet mountains of biomass to recycle. And if their recovery systems are still functioning, many of the warriors you destroyed may eventually return anyway. And then we have the Orks. The Necrons lived through the war in heaven, when the Krork, the ancient predecessors of modern Orks, were still being created for war. So if the Necrons really possess that kind of potential, if their technology is millions of years ahead of most civilizations alive today, and if the armies currently waking are only fragments of the infinite empire, then why haven't they destroyed everyone else and taken the galaxy back? What is actually stopping them? The first problem is that the Necrons are not fully awake. Their return isn't one coordinated event happening everywhere at once. Tomb worlds are waking at different times, in different conditions, and with very different levels of damage. Some dynasties have returned with enormous armies and functioning fleets. Others are only shadows of what they once were. Many tomb worlds remain dormant, so the Necron forces fighting today are not the full strength of their civilization. But that strength also can't simply be summoned overnight. After 60 million years, some tomb worlds wake successfully, some have lost parts of their armies, and some have suffered catastrophic failures before their rulers even open their eyes. The potential is enormous. Much of it just isn't available yet. And when a dynasty does wake, another problem appears. The Necrons are no longer a truly unified empire. Each dynasty returns with its own territory, armies, and rulers. Their pharaohs and overlords still carry personalities, pride, and ambitions that go back tens of millions of years. Part of the reason goes back to a decision made by the Silent King after the war in heaven. Following biotransference, Sarek possessed enormous control over his people through the Necron command protocols. A civilization divided between competing dynasties could still be forced to obey a single authority. But before the Great Sleep, the Silent King gave that control up. He broke the protocols that bound the Necrons to his command and eventually left the galaxy. 60 million years later, a pharaoh who wakes does not automatically have to obey him. He can decide what territory belongs to him, which enemies matter, who is worth negotiating with, and, if necessary, which other Necrons need to be destroyed. They care about status, and many of them are extremely ambitious. That's why someone like Imotekh the Stormlord can become such a serious problem for the Silent King. Imotekh isn't simply one of Sharek's generals. He is the pharaoh of the Imotekh dynasty, commands considerable military power of his own, and built an expanding Necron empire while the Silent King was absent. So when Sharek returned, Imotekh had very little reason to simply hand authority back to him. From Imotekh's point of view, the Silent King is no longer an absolute ruler whose commands every Necron is physically compelled to obey. He is another king trying to bring the dynasties back under his influence. Taken as a species, they possess an absurd amount of technology and military power. But it isn't sitting under one command structure. A Imotekh fleet doesn't automatically fight for the Silent King. A tomb world waking somewhere in the galaxy doesn't automatically become another army under his control. Dynasties can cooperate when their interests overlap, but they can just as easily compete over territory, influence, and political dominance. For some Necron lords, the most important threat may not even be the Imperium, the Orks, or another younger race. It may be another Necron lord. And that makes sense when you consider how many Necrons see the civilizations around them. They know how old their civilization is and what it once achieved. To many Pharons, humanity and most younger species are little more than upstarts living on territory that once belonged to the Infinite Empire. Some of the technology those civilizations consider miraculous would look almost primitive to beings who were fighting interstellar wars millions of years before humanity evolved. From that perspective, the younger races can look less like equals and more like children playing with tools they barely understand. Another Necron Pharon is different. He may control his own tomb worlds, fleets, and armies, and he comes from the same ancient technological civilization. More importantly, he can compete for the same territory and the same position in whatever Necron order eventually emerges. An Imperial army may be an obstacle. Another Pharon is a rival. So while the younger races fear more tomb worlds waking, many Necron rulers may be asking a different question. When the Infinite Empire rises again, who stands at the top? There is also a weakness hidden behind one of the Necron's greatest strengths. On the battlefield, that distinction is easy to miss. Shoot a Necron warrior down, and that doesn't necessarily mean you killed it. Its necrodermis can repair damaged components, and reanimation protocols can restore warriors after wounds that would instantly kill almost anything made of flesh. If the body is damaged too badly, it may even be removed from the battlefield and reconstructed elsewhere. But reanimation protocols are not perfect resurrection. Recovery can fail. A body can be damaged beyond repair. The information required to reconstruct a Necron can be lost. The systems responsible for rebuilding damaged warriors can themselves be destroyed. And when that happens, a Necron can actually die permanently. The Necrons are no longer a biological species producing new generations. The individuals alive today are essentially what remains of the Necrontyr who passed through biotransference roughly 60 million years ago. Their bodies can be repaired or rebuilt, but they can't simply manufacture another generation of Necrons to replace permanent losses. They can build Imotekh constructs, scarabs, and other machines. That isn't the same thing. Their population may be enormous, but it is still finite, and it was already being reduced during the Great Sleep. Tomb worlds failed. Some were destroyed by geological disasters, some were discovered by younger civilizations, and others suffered catastrophic system failures after millions of years underground. Every Necron permanently lost that way was something that could never simply be replaced. That gives them a very different relationship with casualties compared to races like the Orks or Tyranids. Kill millions of Orks and spores can eventually produce more. A hive fleet can lose countless organisms taking a planet and then replace many of those losses by consuming the planet itself. The Necrons can't do that. A Necron warrior can be repaired 1,000 times, but it is still the same Necron warrior. If recovery fails for good on the 1,001st attempt, the dynasty has permanently lost one more member. Maybe it's only a warrior with almost nothing left of its original personality. Maybe it's an immortal. Or maybe it's a cryptek or Necron lord carrying knowledge from before the Great Sleep itself. Whatever was lost, there is no younger Necron waiting to replace it. So calling them immortal can be misleading. Individually, they are extraordinarily difficult to kill. As a species, every true death reduces their numbers permanently. And then there is another assumption people often make about them, that the Necrons as a whole want to wipe out every living thing in the galaxy. They don't. The destroyer cults are probably the closest thing to that stereotype. To them, biological life itself is the problem. They have little interest in ruling populations or rebuilding an empire. They want life gone. But the destroyers do not represent the entire species. Imotekh wants power and expansion. He wants a greater Imotekh empire under his rule. Other races may become enemies, subjects, or obstacles, but exterminating every living organism isn't necessarily the goal. Then you have Trazyn, His priorities are completely different. He is obsessed with history, artifacts, individuals, and events he considers worthy of preservation. A completely dead galaxy isn't particularly useful to someone who has spent millions of years collecting pieces of it. And then there is the Silent King. One of Sharika's long-term ambitions is to undo the consequences of biotransference and somehow free his species from their metal bodies. If that is ever going to happen, organic life may not simply be something to destroy. From his perspective, reducing the entire galaxy to a lifeless graveyard could actually work against the future he wants for his own people. The Necrons don't even agree on what should happen to the galaxy if they win, and their technology has the same problem. When people talk about Necron power, they often take every extraordinary device the species has ever possessed and imagine all of it inside one arsenal. Blackstone technology, weapons from the war in heaven, devices capable of containing Satan shard, machines that can affect planets, stars, and even the fabric of space. Put all of that together and it becomes easy to ask, if the Necrons have all this, why don't they just use it? Because that isn't how their civilization works. A perfect example is the Celestial Orrery. The Orrery is an extraordinary device held by the Necron Dynasty. It represents the galaxy with terrifying precision, and manipulating that representation can produce corresponding effects on real stars. The obvious question is why the Necrons don't simply use it to destroy the stars of their enemies. Because the Celestial Orrery is not a standard weapon sitting inside every tomb world. It belongs to the Necron Dynasty, and the Necrons guarding it understand that carelessly manipulating stars can have consequences even they may not be able to fully control. They don't treat it like a gun another Pharaoh can borrow whenever he wants a solar system removed. Some devices may survive only on a handful of tomb worlds. Others are controlled by particular cryptechs. Some technologies were lost during the Great Sleep. Others still exist, but whoever controls them has no intention of handing them to the Silent King or a rival Pharaoh. There may even be technologies modern Necrons can still operate, but can no longer reproduce on anything close to the scale they once could. So when we take every insane technological achievement in Necron history and combine all of it into one picture, we create a version of the Necrons that doesn't really exist. An infinite empire where every tomb world is awake, every dynasty cooperates, every superweapon is available, and every ruler wants the same thing. That is not the Necrons of the 41st millennium. Their strength is scattered across the galaxy. Their greatest weapons are controlled by different rulers. Their population cannot truly replace permanent losses, and those rulers don't even agree on what victory should look like. So the question, why don't the Necrons just use all their technology and kill everyone, starts from the wrong assumption. The galaxy isn't fighting the infinite empire at full strength, it is fighting its pieces, and those pieces are already terrifying. The real danger is what happens if enough tomb worlds finally wake, and enough of those pieces decide to move in the same direction.